Welcome back, everyone. I'm Archmaester Jack with Archmaester Peter. We are the Two Goblets. This is episode 2 of our series on the Targaryen Dynasty. If you haven't seen episode 1, I highly recommend you pause this and check out that one. I'll have it linked on the screen there. And it'll give you a lot of context toward the topic of this episode, which is the newly reign of Aegon the Dragon, the original Targaryen king. And Archmaester Peter, why don't you give us some backdrop into where we enter Westeros now, like under this new minted dynasty?
Absolutely. So we're coming into the Targaryen reign about 2 years after the finish of the conquest, or I'm sorry, the start of the conquest. So this is after Aegon has been crowned, as we talked about last episode at Old Town, almost directly. We're going to be talking about things that happened almost directly after that. As a bit of a recap, too, our boy Aegon here, who's pictured on the screen, Aegon the First, has conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms on mainland Westeros with his dragons and his gathering army that he built over a period of time during the conquest. He now has various high lords that have bent the knee to him, that are serving as wardens of the various regions of his kingdoms, and he's starting to slowly bring into effect what the Targaryen dynasty is going to be like. But before we talk about the issues and various problems that he faces during his reign, we have to talk about a couple of housekeeping issues just right off the start here, Archmaester Jack.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
we're,
so he's been crowned at, the Starry Sept in Old Town. Um, all of these kings have become Lord Paramounts underneath him. And they're now, where does he find himself? Like, he's got the legitimacy down. He's the king of the Seven Kingdoms.
Yeah, won
What's
by
next?
conquest. Right by right of conquest, he is their king, right? So now he has to clean up a little bit of some of the regions are still not fully peaceful. During the conquest, he defeated a lot of the big armies, but there's some small stuff still going on in Westeros that he has to go and deal with. The first of those things is a small little kingdom, and I'm going to bring up the map here. We should talk very shortly about the map. I'm just going to bring up the credits shortly again. We covered all of this in episode 1, but I wanted to reiterate that this is, these guys' property. Um, but yeah, so here we have Westeros. This is our kingdom. Down here is Dorne, the only remaining independent kingdom. All of the rest of the Westeros south of the Wall has been united under Aegon, and he's ruling here from King's Landing. It is now called, from the Aegon Fort. But a small island kingdom just north of the Vale here, the Three Sisters, it's called, decides to rebel against him very early on. I mean, we're talking in the first couple of months after he's crowned at Old Town. And, this isn't super significant other than to say that, a few things happened there. It showed, I think it kind of instituted, and maybe you could speak a little bit to this, Jack, as well, that there was um, a kind of a pecking order now that he was able to send out certain individuals that were able to act on his behalf while he handled other issues in the kingdom. Um,
Exactly. I think that it's also kind of a power move in of itself. He's the king of the damn Seven Kingdoms. He's got bigger things to worry about than some, island nation deciding that they want to take a stand against 3 dragons. And so
Especially, I mean, such a small territory compared to the territories that he has I mean, look at the size of the Reach or the Westerlands or the Vale comparatively that he has, recently conquered. These are quite a small foe for someone as big as him, as grand as him.
it's
Uh,
not only that, it's also a testament to Aegon's skills as a king, because he's delegating. He's deciding, okay, White Harbor's right there. The North, can mobilize quickly
Absolutely.
enough to go sail after them. So why don't I send my wife to go make sure things are, dealt properly in the name of the king?
Yeah, so
And
as you mentioned, he does send Visenya up there, but really the main person he tasks to handle this situation is the new Warden of the North. He was recently king in the North, Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. We talked about him to some length last episode. But he was tasked, as well as Visenya, to bring an end to this minor rebellion. There was a queen there named Marla Sunderland. She's not very important in the course of history, but we did think it was important to mention these little things that happened, you know. Uh, but yeah, so she gets quickly defeated as, you know, the Northern Fleet shows up in Sisterton, and Vagar is flying overhead. The lords of the Three Sisters turn on their queen and essentially turn her over, and she gets exiled. Um, Later in her life, she becomes a thing called a Silent Sister, but I think maybe we'll save the Silent Sisters for another episode because there's some Targaryen princesses that go down that route that maybe we could, since we are focused on the Targaryens in this, you know. Uh,
Absolutely, and the Faith of the Seven comes up constantly in the story of the Targaryens,
for sure.
um, as we'll see later on.
Yeah. The next thing that kind of happens, the next kind of small thing that happens is the Iron Islands, which again we covered to some extent in the last episode. Has a couple of little rebellions that happen there. You see, when King Harren died, that was Harrenhal, who was burned at Harrenhal by Aegon. Um, the Iron Islands, it wasn't clear who was going to succeed him because all of his sons died and all of his relatives died in Harrenhal. So there wasn't a clear succession for who was going to rule the Iron Islands. A lot of people um, put their hat in the ring for this. One such guy is a guy called Corin Volmark, and he had a very strenuous connection. Like he was like some great uncle of Harren's great grandson or something like this, and so he was like, well, I must be uh, the next in line, given that all of Harren's immediate family is dead. Um, so he kind of has a little moment where he's trying to garner support. There's this crazy priest, Lodos, who is a priest of the drowned god. And let me pull up that slide too for a second. Get rid of this real quick. So these are images from the Game of Thrones show of the drowned god, but they're pretty accurate to the books. What did you say? I think they're a good showcasing of what these guys kind of look like.
Yeah, and this is Aaron Dampere, right?
Yeah, this is
This is
particularly Aaron Dampere, yeah. But the
yeah.
the focus of this was just to kind of show you what um, a drowned priest might look like. So there's a religion on the Iron Islands. Maybe Jack, you could talk a little bit about the drowned god and his priests and the Ironborn.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very different custom than mainland Westeros, absolutely. The idea that, you know, the depths of the sea hold secrets and ultimately death, and what it means to be Ironborn is to not fear death and sail across the world roving and raving and doing all sorts of their ways, the Iron Price.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one of the things too. Is their one of their religious practices is they kind of do a baptism of sorts, but rather than just like dunking your head like the Catholics might here on our planet, they drown the individual. So they let water fill up their lungs and then they bring them back to the surface and they don't do anything to resuscitate them. The purpose of this exercise is to essentially whittle out the weak. So if you're unable to come back from the drowning and by your own body's volition, get rid of that water, that salt water that's in your lungs, you're not fit to be Ironborn. Uh, so they're a really gnarly people. But what the point of what we're talking about here is this priest Lodos, and he would look something like this. He would have these kind of accoutrements, gray simple rags, bones of whales and various sea animals on him, and he was leading the Ironborn, the more zealot Ironborn, in a kind of religious revolution against the Targaryen rule. Aegon pulls up, as one does when revolutions happen. And Aegon, has Balerion the Black Dread, as we mentioned in the previous episode. Big, giant dragon that breathes hot fire. So he's relatively scary just by himself. Like, he didn't really come with fleets or anything. Like, he just kind of pulled up. And Lodos, this is a fun little story. Lodos went to the beach, like near where Balerion and Aegon had come, and tried to summon the drowned god, like essentially krakens from the deep, to kill Balerion and Aegon, to like strike down these pretenders. In this kind of Moses-like moment, right? He walks out to the water, um, but no krakens come, and rather than like admitting that he was wrong or something, he decides that the Krakens need a sacrifice. So he leads his people out into the water in kind of a mass drowning event, and all of his people drown with him. And their bodies pile up in Lord's Port, which is the great port in Pike, in the main island of the Iron Islands. It's a pretty gnarly little story. But Aegon sees this and he's like, "Whoa, these guys are kind of crazy." Um, and he knows that they won't like accept foreign rule. They're not going to accept like a Lannister or something, right? Archmaester Jack, or like a Tully. Like, these guys aren't going to be ruled
Absolutely.
over by regular Westerosi guys.
And Aegon is, I think, impressed with their faith. I mean, it's crazy. Like their defiance, their unwillingness to be overlorded is something different, you know? It's
Yeah,
I mean, could you imagine seeing hundreds of people just drown themselves? It's like,
it's definitely a sight to behold. You know.
yeah, terrifying, horrible. So yeah, he just pulls up and he just says, "I don't know, figure it out." Right?
Yeah, he
But
gives.
he actually establishes sort of a new tradition among the Ironborn.
Right. So we would call it a king's moot. So essentially, the lords of the Iron Islands, the various lords, there's about 13, 14 of them. We're not going to cover all of them, but the various lords came together, and they decided who was going to be their Lord Paramount. And that ended up being a guy called Vicon Greyjoy, and he was Lord of Pike, which was this kind of island fortress on the southern part of the Iron Islands. Here, let me show the map on that. I can show you where that is. Right here. Um, so they moved kind of the court. The original court of the Iron Islands was like on the coastline here of this great island here, Great Wick. Um, it was on the coastline here, but they moved court to where the Greyjoys rule in Pike, and they became the Lord Paramounts. And that's kind of a little bit of housekeeping that Aegon did in the very early reign, and we just wanted to cover it really quickly before we talk about kind of the big thing, which is going to be his southern neighbor, the Principality of Dorne. So we're gonna take a quick break here, unless Archmaester Jack, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, briefly, if you could head back up to the Iron Islands.
Sure.
The Kingsmoot, this election actually does become a tradition where even though when a Lord Paramount Greyjoy dies, there's an election and other lords can pledge their case for ruling the Ironborn. Now, very rarely does any lord get some sort of traction against the Greyjoys. It's still very much dynastic, but it does lead Greyjoys to attempt to do a crazy amazing things in order to continue to win over their support of their people in a way that, say, other dynasties in Westeros don't really have a problem with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. They have to like kind of um, repeatedly one up their ancestors in like successes in order to keep proving the point that they should be the rulers of the Iron Islands. So they get up to some crazy stuff, and we'll definitely come back to the Iron Islands. They do some gnarly stuff in the coming centuries that we're going to cover. So Yeah, we're gonna take
Definitely.
we're gonna take a quick break here, and we'll be back to talk about the first Dornish War. Welcome back, guys. We're gonna hop straight into the Dornish War here, the first Dornish War. As a quick reminder before we jump in, because it does happen, and it's this way in the source material as well, but it appears that it kind of comes out of nowhere. But of course, there is foundation in the conquest itself, which we covered in our previous episode. This particular meeting, and this is a different artwork. I picked a different artwork for you guys just so I wasn't repeating artworks. This one by Magali Villeneuve. Um, but this is the original meeting of Princess Rhaenys here and the princess, or I'm sorry, Queen Rhaenys at this point, and the Princess Miria Martell. And they had a conversation in which Rhaenys essentially said, "Hey, we're the Targaryens are coming to rule over all of the land, and you're part of the land, so we're gonna rule over you too." And Miria was kind of like, "Yeah, good luck with that. Like come back at your own peril." So we wanted to briefly cover that because this thing kicks off quickly, doesn't it? Doesn't it, Archmaester Jack?
Yeah, and for the formative part of King Aegon's years, although we don't get much writing about it from the Maesters, what I'd like to think is that Queen Rhaenys was establishing what we would know in contemporary Game of Thrones to be the royal court, which in King's Landing, all of the most influential lords in the land kind of came about to see the daily dealings of the Seven Kingdoms, you know, at the Iron Throne in the hall. So it's it's kind of alluded to that she kind of foments that, and then but she remembers the promise that she makes to the Princess Miria,
Fire and blood.
and that's right, absolutely. And she shows up abruptly and burns Planky Town to the ground.
Yeah, let's pull up the map here while you talk about that real quick. I'm still looking at
And
the Iron
this
Island here.
isn't an army, this isn't a castle where there's soldiers, or any sorts of things like that. Planky Town is a market town. It's filled with, common people that probably have only ever heard stories of dragons, let alone seen dragonfire. And Rhaenys burns it pretty much to the ground single-handedly.
Well, to this
Um,
to this day, I always say to this day when talking about this series, but that's not what I mean. Even to the point of the main series, A Song of Ice and Fire, a Game of Thrones, and that stuff. Um, Planky Town is still heavily damaged by what Rhaenys does there. Um, it never really recovers as a city after the destruction that she brings.
and it's the first instance that we see what dragonfire can really do. Aegon seems very reserved in the way that he typically uses his dragons, but now we see a dragon lord unleashed, and
Yeah, worse than Harrenhal.
thousands thousands of Dornishmen, innocent or otherwise, lost their lives. I mean, it's an atrocity that kind of starts to make us think, oh wow, when you have a weapon of mass destruction like this, there can be consequences that are catastrophic and indeed really sad.
Yeah, I also want to ask you a question here. I think you might have an interesting response to it. Don't you find it kind of interesting that it's Rhaenys here that does this destruction? This sounds more like one of her siblings. Like it sounds more like Visenya or Aegon, and yet it's her.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I find the confrontation with the princess earlier to be a promise, um, that she would come back and it won't be pretty for them. I
And
think
and
that
her specifically, like she feels like it's her honor bound thing.
absolutely, and she's a queen in her own right. I mean, you know, she she made a promise and she intended to keep it for Dorne's defiance.
I also
Whether or not it's morally correct in the way that
yeah,
we would understand it is ambiguous, I guess, the way that
absolutely.
the Archmaesters write it. about it in the texts. But
Well, and they're not particularly fond of dragon riders either. We talked about that bias a little bit in the first episode. Kind of anti-Valerian sentiments for sure. Especially,
exactly.
given the audience, they're trying to give it to these Baratheons kings who have overthrown the Targaryen dynasty. So they kind of shed a dark light on them as well a little bit. I also think here, insofar as reasoning for Rhaenys, Visenya was very successful during the conquest. She brought the Vale into the fold. She won that battle at Goldtown. She, had various successes throughout the conquest, and Dorne was given to Rhaenys as a task, and she wasn't successful. The Dornish stayed independent even after Aegon was crowned. So I think there's a pride thing here as well in competition with her sister a little bit, where it's like, well, this is the kingdom that I was tasked with, so I have to bring it into the fold. So I have to be the one that goes and burns this city. Sets the stage.
And we see the Dornish replicate the same classic tactics we'll see in every single invasion in the first Dornish War. Oris Baratheon, the Hand of the King, musters his forces in the Stormlands and begins marching down the Bone Way, which is this bridge. If you want to zoom in
Yeah,
there,
I'll zoom
Archmaester
in a little bit
Peter.
there.
It's this bridge that goes across the river and grants entry into the eastern reaches of Dorne. And he struggles there. There's a Lord Will of Will, the widow lover, as he's known, because he's known to sleep with the wives of his dead enemies. Pretty
Nasty
wild
guy.
guy. Yeah. Actually catches him in a rout at the foot of the Bone Way and captures him, and actually makes his forces flee back across the Bone Way, defensively back into the Stormland. So already the invasion is at a shaky start.
Yeah, well, and I think particularly there too, that's a tough way to come into Dorne. We'll see when we talk about Aegon. That's a relatively easier pass over here to the east, or I'm sorry, to the west. The Prince's Pass here, but the Bone Way's tough, man. It's like hiking a mountain. You're on a mountain path. There are Dornishmen in the rocks above you throwing stones and spears at you while you're trying to go. All your horses get stolen in the night. Like, this is the kind of warfare that they're dealing with while they try to come into Dorne. And comparatively to their successes, fighting the other kingdoms during the conquest, this is a shock for them, for the dragons. You maybe want to talk about on Aegon now, on coming down the Prince's Pass.
Absolutely. The Prince's Pass, surprisingly, there were no soldiers there. And we see that guerrilla warfare the first time here. They just flee. They don't care about keeping some of their forts or holdfasts along their roads. But instead, they poison the wells, they burn the fields, and they make sure that Aegon and his horses and his men have no way to recuperate the supplies that they're bringing with them down this pass. And so we hear stories of soldiers starving to death and just being left out in the pass, not even buried, as this forced march kind of continues down the Prince's Pass, because they have to get down into the southern reaches where they can find supplies again.
Yeah.
Um, which is also horrible. We see these tactics really successful against an army that they know they have no chance of meeting really in the field, this kind of war of attrition.
Yeah, no, and they as you say, they make special efforts to ensure that there's no port of harbor for this conquering army that's coming into Dorne. They do finally make it to Hellholt after a very disastrous and atrocious march. Aegon was with a Reachlander army led by Lord Harlan Tyrell. We mentioned him in the previous episode as well. But they lost many men as they marched through the deserts without safe drinking wells and things. But they did finally get to a place where there was a little bit of respite. They found it deserted. That's going to be the story over and over again as we talk about Dorne. These places are desolate and deserted. When they arrive. Aegon decides to leave Lord Tyrell and a majority of the force there in Hellholt, seeing it as a kind of a strategic position in Dorne, and he's right about that. It's very centered and easy to march to almost anywhere in Dorne from Hellholt. And he continues on to the various castles, again, finding most of them abandoned or emptied. A few exceptions, there are a couple of very young lords that were still, like children, that were still in their castles, or on the inverse, very old lords that couldn't run away and hide that were still in their castles, but mostly like no one. And he makes it all the way to Sunspear, which is the capital, and meets basically no resistance. Um, so he thinks, like, as he has previously done with the other kingdoms that he conquered, he's like, yeah, we won. We have all the castles. There are armies in place that are gonna, keep uh, this place in control. And so we're cool. We're gonna go home. So he gets his wife, Rhaenys, and he starts marching back home. And then what happens, Archmaester Jack?
Well, they return to King's Landing, and they install John Rosby as Lord Paramount of Dorne, who is this Crownlands lord that has been loyal. His house has been loyal to the Targaryens for hundreds of years, which is a different way than Aegon usually does it. This is an outsider being installed to rule the Dornish.
Well, I mean, there's no Dornishmen left to give the crown to, so they're all in the hills.
Very true. And then begins the long struggle, in which these armies and these controlling forces are slowly bled through insurrections, small ambushes, kidnapping officials, escalating into Harlan Tyrell disappearing off the face of the earth.
Yeah, with a whole army at his back.
Simultaneously, and this is odd, they return hostages. So Oris Baratheon is returned to King's Landing.
There's something different
Lost
about
his
him, though.
sword hand.
Yeah.
He's known as the Handless, and decides that, a man without a hand cannot be Hand of the King, and resigns
he
and
has a
returns to
pretty good
Storm's End.
he has a pretty good line there. I think that we should probably add in, which is he's like a king's hand should have a hand. I will not have people speaking of the king's stump.
Exactly. And so he returns to Storm's End, honestly, to lick his wounds. I mean, he spent the better part of a year being tortured in some Dornish dungeon. So,
Yeah, he
I
had a
think
rough
I would
go.
want to head home after that as well.
But I think that's a good point that kind of marks the escalation in the war. Even though it was a return of hostages, I think it was more a taunting effort on the part of the Dornish than like a conciliatory, peaceful effort. It was like, look at what we did to your guys. Now they're handless. They can never raise a sword against Dorne again. That's the kind of level that it is. It shouldn't be looked at as like a peaceful effort. And it really did cause an escalation in the war. I mean, Aegon, after Orys's return, goes on a vengeful attack against the Wills, which is, as we mentioned, Will of Will, the widow lover, this little castle right here on the coastline of northern Dorne. He goes on a burning streak against them, promising that it'll be a second Harrenhal. Unfortunately, Will of Will and his relatives survive. They again flee into the mountains, hide from the dragon fire. A strategy you're going to see over and over again from the Dornish. They're nothing if not consistent. I think this is kind of the point where the war gets a little unhinged. I think you'd agree there, Jack. There's a various atrocities that go back and forth. A pirate king from the Stepstones raids Cape Wrath, which is this kind of section of the Stormlands just north of Dorne here. There's, Visenya goes down, burns a bunch of the various castles and holdings in Dorne on Vagar. Visenya and Aegon, it's shortly after that in the next year, attack Sandstone and Faith, and they really spend a good portion of time destroying Dornish infrastructure, burning down cities, burning down forts and castles.
Absolutely. And it's, it's interesting. The Martells, they say you're destroying what we love, like our country, our people, our places, our homes. We're gonna destroy what you love. We're gonna maim your supposed half brother, send him
Yeah,
back to you broken. Like that's the kind of level this has gotten to. And I think that at this point, after years of essentially, insurgency and basically the civilians being no different than, the lords that they're trying to fight, they're also just murdering soldiers in the streets.
yeah.
Uh,
I
it
mean, there's
becomes untenable.
atrocities on both of these, fronts. They're both of them committing horrible, horrible crimes against each other. In the following year in 10 AC, which now we're advancing a little bit quicker here because we're trying to get through the portion of the Dornish War, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about some other stuff that happened in this first decade of his rule. But by 10 AC, there was such a level of hatred between these two warring factions, um, that the Dornish finally strike back. They march armies into the Reach and into the Stormlands, like actual Dornish armies, not pirates or assassins. Um, and they attack Night Song, which is, I don't know if it's listed here. Oh yeah, here it is. Just on the northern part of Dorne here, on the southern border of the Reach. Uh, Burn it to the ground, kill all of the lords and his children and stuff there. A very, very atrocious night for the Night Song castle. There's also the Danes march and they attack Old Town. They burn through the outer city. They don't really have the forces to take such a big city like Old Town with its big old walls. But they burn through the outer city. They take hostages and slaves and things, and do a lot of damage here in the southern part of the Reach. So that's another kind of escalation in the war. And Aegon responds in kind. He calls forth all three of his dragons, and he sends them to the various holdings of the armies that had marched out. So he sends, I believe, Visenya goes to Starfall. Yes, that's right. Visenya goes to Starfall. He himself goes to Skyreach, which is where the Fowlers come from. They're the ones who attack Nightsong, burn Nightsong. And then he sends his younger sister to Rhaenys, to Hellholt, which was that original location that they conquered during the first kind of roll through, and also the location of the disappearance of Harlan Tyrell. Um, and there, something really, really awful happens. Archmaester Jack, I'm going to let you take this one.
So the Dornish War has been going on for close to 6 or 7 years now. And my theory is that now the Dornish are really trying to get a real answer to the dragons. And so they uh, are able to acquire siege weapons, I think possibly from Essos, that are capable of killing a dragon in the sky. And a scorpion on the battlements of Hellholt gets a lucky blow and shoots Meraxes in the eye. And she falls into the castle and dies.
This is an image of the fall of Meraxes. Um, Artwork here by Chase Stone. This is a super significant moment in Targaryen history. Um, this is the first time, and I could be wrong about this, Archmaester Jack. Maybe you could correct me here, but I believe that this is the first time that a dragon was slain in combat. Um, Here in Westeros, I think it has happened in Essos, obviously, but here in Westeros, I think this was the first time that a dragon was slain in combat.
That
And
we know, indeed. And it kind of breaks the
the illusion,
sort of myth of
yeah,
invulnerability, of invincibility that the dragons give to the Targaryens a little bit.
no, absolutely. I mean, it pulls away from that unbeatable, almost godlike force. Right, here's now a dead dragon, and potentially a dead writer. We'll talk a little bit more about the mystery around Queen Rhaenys' death as we get into the later reign. But for now, we'll just say that she fell with her dragon, and it was a very serious blow to Aegon and his family. Um, the period that follows this, I also think, Jack, you should cover this section as well here. The period that follows this is known as the Wrath of the Dragon, and it's about a 2-year period. And you can talk a little bit about what that means and what he was after.
Well, Fire and Blood. This isn't about war anymore. His beloved sister is gone. This is a personal blow to Aegon now. And he spends the next 2 years along with Visenya, who, also I'm sure loved her sister very much. They burned Dorne for about 2 years. And when I say burned Dorne, I mean the whole of Dorne. You can't even name a single holdfast or keep or town that was spared Dragonfire. At least once has been burnt. But we see these attacks start to diminish around the end of around 12 AC, and eventually they give up. And they tried to maybe have some sort of propaganda to turn the Dornishmen against the Martells. They had some bounties on, lords' heads where they would be paid out in golden dragons for, turning over their lords. And a
And vice
few of them
versa.
were turned over. Yes, absolutely. And dozens of lords and knights, hundreds of knights, and just there was a lot of death.
Yeah, I
And
do I want to list a little bit in this part. We weren't bringing up the names a lot before, but I feel like in this part, it showcases how serious this period of the war was by listing some of the names. So if you would indulge me just a moment. Um, so on the Dornish side, Lord Fowler, who again was one of the ones who attacked Night Song, is killed in one of these assassinations. The Lord of Faith is killed in one of these assassinations. Lord Tolland of Ghost Hill killed. And then 4 successive lords of Hellholt, the Ullers. So 4, I think it was a father, a son, and then 2 more brothers after that. All are assassinated in very quick succession. On the Targaryen side, so this is the rest of Westeros, Lord Connington, who the Conningtons will come up a lot more as we continue down the Targaryen story, but he is killed on a hunt. The entire Merton household of Mistwood was poisoned by a cask of wine, of Dornish wine. Will of Will, who we've mentioned a few times, the widow lover, infiltrated a wedding of Sir John Caffrey and Alice Oakhart, kind of a precursor to the Red Wedding here, kills most of the wedding guests and then sells off the women, including the bride, as slaves to Mir in Essos. So, I mean, we talk about the escalation of the war. This is an entirely new level where the great lords are being killed in their halls. Like this is a very reaching a nasty point.
And King Aegon himself was attacked, and like 3 separate times there are failed assassinations on him. But his sister never leaves his side, Visenya, through the course of these insurgencies, and is
Especially
able to
after the
save him
death of
once.
Rhaenys.
And then also Aegon himself is a very capable warrior and is surrounded by the most capable knights in the realm. So, there weren't really any successes or near successes, but the fact that they're even going after the king is pretty wild. Not to mention ballista bolts and whatever else he might have been dodging while burning down Dorne those previous 2 years.
Yeah. And he did, as you said, burn most of Dorne. The only place he didn't really go after is the capital, which is strange, Sunspear. There's a couple of reasons for that, possibly. Archmaester Jack mentioned previously possible dragon killing weapons from Essos. Uh, maybe a Lyseni device of some kind that was used to bring down dragons when they were ruled over by dragon overlords. Um, it's also possible that this was a form of strategy to turn the rest of the Dornish against the Martells. Archmaester Timothy, who is one of the Archmaesters that Archmaester Gildane uses as a source, says that this was possibly the reason that he spared Sunspear, was that he wanted to make it seem like the Martells weren't losing as much in the war as the rest of the Dornish were, and perhaps create some kind of insurrection or rebellion amongst the Dornish lords. But yeah, that goes on for about 2 years. Real nasty stuff. And then a peace offer comes. Princess Meria, who we were talking about earlier, the Yellow Toad of Dorne, dies. Not in battle or anything, just of old age in her castle. And her quite old son, her aging son, Prince Namor Martell, becomes Lord of Dorne. And he decides it's time for peace. So he sends his daughter, who's also named Maria. Unfortunately, you're going to get this a lot in GeorgeRRMartin's work. There's a lot of characters that are just named the same thing, and it's really hard to keep them straight. But this is her granddaughter, Maria, the new Princess of Dorne. He sends her up there to King's Landing with a peace offer. In the peace offer, he has the skull of Meraxes delivered back. So that's Rhaenys' dragon, the one that was killed. He has Miria bring that up with her to King's Landing, and also a letter written in Prince Namor's own hand. At first, the Targaryens were kind of pissed that they brought the dragon skull. They were like, "Yo, this is not cool to parade a dead dragon through the streets of King's Landing," and we'll see reflections of this later in the series as well, that it is damaging to the Targaryen reputation to see the skull of a dragon. But Aegon, I think, tired of the war as well, tempered the kind of louder voices in the court and said, "Hey, let's hear him out." So Miria is able to deliver her father's letter. And Archmaester Jack, maybe you could talk about the letter a little bit. I think it's kind of an interesting, compelling part of this story.
Well, we don't know too much about what the contents of the letter necessarily, only that it did convince Aegon to sue for peace. It's kind of a mysterious question mark in the history of Westeros, but there are some theories, and we can kind of go over one of those, which is potentially that Queen Rhaenys is still alive as a hostage, kept by Dorne. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we did mention while we talked about the death of Meraxes that it's possible that Rhaenys survived the crash and the death of her dragon. It's not unheard of. We will see later in the story people surviving dragon crashes even when their dragon dies. So it does happen, but it is unlikely. But it's a possible theory that what this letter essentially says is, your beloved Rhaenys is still alive, and like I'll send her a piece of you for every castle that you burn from here on out. Something of this nature. Or perhaps it is just, I've heard other theories that it is just a father um, reaching out. Prince Namor has many sons, and he didn't want to see them killed in useless conflict. And Aegon now has two sons himself, and even grandchildren at this point, who we'll talk about in just a second. So it could also just be a true, like, hey, let's put an end to this. Like, no one is going to win this. We've spilt enough blood for pride's sake, and even for vengeance's sake at this point. So maybe let's put an end to this and not let any more children get killed. Could be anything. Maybe we'll never know. But we do know that the letter was effective enough that Aegon rose from the Iron Throne with a bloodied hand, ordered the letter be burned, and immediately ended the conflict with Dorne.
He lost his hand, he lost Queen, and then you could argue he lost the war. And that was that for Dorne for quite some time. Though we'll explore more wars that Dorne has with the Seven Kingdoms later on.
Yeah, in future episodes. So yeah, that covers the war with Dorne. When we return, we will talk about the later reign of King Aegon and some of the actions that he took as king. We'll also talk about his family, his sons, and their children. Yeah, and welcome back, folks. So now we're going to be talking about the later reign of King Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon the Dragon. This is going to cover a period during the Dornish War and also after the Dornish War. Some of the stuff that he did insofar as being a king rather than just a conqueror. Because up to this point, we've talked a lot about his conquests and his military victories, but he was also a good king. Archmaester Jack, why don't you take it away? Talk about what a good king this guy was.
So Aegon takes control in the six kingdoms that he has and immediately establishes a system that the Westerosi lords are already very familiar with, where there's delegations of authority. He doesn't necessarily enforce his laws and the kingdom's laws with his own men everywhere across Westeros. It's a very big place. So instead, the Lord Paramounts of the Stormlands or the Reach would kind of deal the king's justice in his stead and keep the peace. And the king's peace is possibly the most important legal like constitution that Westeros has underneath the Targaryen kings. It essentially means that the lords of the Seven Kingdoms cannot go to war unless the king of the Seven Kingdoms bathes them to. So immediately that stops all infighting. The lords cannot settle their disputes martially; they must do so diplomatically in courts, and that's something that the
Unless given permission by the king, which occasionally he does get permission for lords to trounce on their enemies, but very rare.
yes, it becomes a very it becomes a rarity. And this creates peace throughout the Seven Kingdoms that they haven't had ever before. All of a sudden, the squabbles of petty kings and lords and dukes and all sorts of manners of nobility pretty much come to a stop. And we see that instead, intrigue becomes the new way that these lords settle their differences.
That's a really good point, Archmaester Jack. I think intrigue does become the new language of the realm. Previously it was the sword. It was, what army, like how big is the army that you can gather? How powerful of a force can you bring to bear on your enemies? And
How many knights do you have?
exactly. Like, and also how well armored are they? Like those were kind of the language of conquest and violence in Westeros, and then it kind of shifts under Aegon. It becomes more, oh, I'm gonna marry my daughter to this lord to ensure that he's my friend, and I'm going to hold a feast and make sure all of my nearby lords are happy with me and that kind of thing. Um, or just straight whispers and shadows and assassin's blades, right? Like also on that level. So that
Poison and faceless men. It
right,
all becomes more tucked underneath the surface of the daily political goings of the Seven Kingdoms.
absolutely.
So then there's the Queen's laws as well. So Rhaenys really made it her charge to look after the small folk and established some very limited but also very binding laws preventing them from mass abuse from their lords. No longer could a lord take out their frustrations on the population. The king of the Seven Kingdoms also has some small say in the taxation of small folk, and can intervene if they feel that taxes are too severe. There's minor things like this. They get very much involved into the economics of each of the kingdoms, which at this point had been also economically segregated as well.
Very true. I think Rainey's also, in addition to the small folk, which definitely was one of her focuses, she also really liked being a kind of what would be the word there, Archmaester Jack? Someone who provides for like like I guess a provider or something, but she liked having bards and singers and poets and artists around. She really influenced the culture in King's Landing, and many songs were written about her beauty and Visenya's fierceness and Aegon's temperateness as a result of her relationship with these bards. So it kind of cemented their
Absolutely.
legacy as a ruling class of Westeros.
To Aegon and his sister's credit, they really understood the culture of Westeros, and we'll see that in both of the sisters' founding of institutions. While Rhaenys sort of creates songs and legends for the small folk to talk about throughout the realm, Visenya creates an elite guard for Aegon called the Kingsguard. That's where we get the Kingsguard from. She essentially says, "I don't trust the bodyguards that you have. You know, you've already almost been assassinated 3 times."
Yeah, and
So
she saved him once too, so she's got, kind of personal stake in this as well.
exactly, and she actually proves this point in a very interesting and kind of vicious way in the books, where she is able to draw Dark Sister and have it at Aegon's throat before his guard can react. And so the Kingsguard is instituted, and knights from across the realm, regardless of status, were invited to see if they could be the best warrior to protect the king. And so the martial sort of chivalric tradition that we see prominently mostly in southern Westeros and regions like the Reach, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, basically all of them instead of the North, there's something for them to aspire to within the Crown's institution as well.
Right, like there is also a high level that they can reach, and that's not just the Kingsguard, but as well the King's Council as well. And there wasn't a formal true King's Council till the reign of Jaehaerys, but Aegon did have people around him, including the Kingsguard, that were advisors and friends, and he really instituted that as kind of a major part of being king is doting upon your high lords with various court titles and things, and making sure that they feel a part of the process as well as part of the royal process, not just their own feudal process, down in the lower kingdoms.
It's incredibly important because these regions had never been united before. They had to learn how to work together. And so the Targaryen king and the original Targaryen queens were incredibly, incredibly intelligent in weaving these disparate lords together, and even the knights of the realm together into a singular martial force. The largest martial force united in all of the world as we know it.
Yeah, at this point, certain. I mean, the Dothraki maybe could bring a bigger force to bear, but they're the Dothraki, so uh,
Right. And we'd be amiss to talk about some of the innovations that the Targaryens created without talking about the King's Road. If you wanted to briefly pull up the map and
yeah, absolutely.
zoom in on that.
I'm still looking at Dorne here, but we'll go back up. So here's King's Landing. As we talked about before, very well centered in the kingdom, but this kingdom was still lacking something pretty important, which was connection between the major cities. There wasn't like straight up a full connective tissue. There were roads, like the Gold Road existed to a certain point. I'm not sure how far it went this direction, but the Gold Road existed to a certain point. So did the Rose Road, and the Wolf Road up north as well existed, but there was no connective tissue to this. So one of Aegon's big drives, and we'll talk a little bit about his royal progresses a little bit too, and this is one of the things that inspired that, was to build a connective road that ensured that he could get anywhere in his kingdom and bring a massive force with him too, is the other important factor there. He wanted to be able to bring armies across great distances of land with relative ease. So he commissioned the building of a great road, which will become to be known as the King's Road. And this extends, during his reign, this happens from Moat Cailin all the way down past the Riverlands, here and near the Erie, over the river, all the way down through the Crownlands, and it extends out to to Storm's End here, and also continues down till it reaches the Road at Bitterbridge and connects that tissue as well. So he builds this massive road to ensure that he can get anywhere in his kingdom with relative ease.
Not only his armies, but trade as well. Suddenly, wagons can go as far as Old Town and reach as far as the north in one singular travel. And so this obviously flourishes trade in a way that Westeros has never seen before. Taverns, small little villages begin to crop up all across the King's Road as caravans need a place to, stay the night and replenish with food and supplies.
Yeah, there's a couple
And
of good examples of that. The Crossroads Inn, the Ivy Inn, Hayford Castle becomes much larger as a result of the existence of the King's Road. A lot of these places along the road become just flourishing locations of trade and economy.
absolutely. And it's great. I mean, it's exactly what you would want a king of a newly established kingdom to do, is interconnect them all. And geographically he does that, culturally he does that, martially he does that in all the ways that counts. It's Aegon's example in these formative years that sort of extends the Targaryen dynasty for hundreds of years to come.
And they all take great example from him. That another thing that he focuses a lot on during his reign is the expansion of King's Landing, and this is something that we'll see the Targaryens that come after him also take a great interest in. He lays a lot of foundational groundwork, though. I did want to talk about the Iron Throne a little bit because I feel like we kind of glazed over it in the last episode. Um, this is a great image of the Iron Throne. It's done by Mark Simonetti. This is kind of what George had in mind when he wrote it originally. This kind of mountainous uh, pile of swords, very menacing. And Aegon almost looks small. The king almost looks small up there in distant from the court, up on his tower of swords.
And
Um,
what an iconic symbolism for power. I mean, all of your enemies burned swords, a seat.
the thousand
You know, it
blades of Aegon's enemies.
exactly. It sends a message that this is how he exudes his power. This is how he gained it, is through
And
conquest.
this is his right as well, right? This is why I'm king, is because all of these swords belong to me now, you know.
Ex- Exactly.
Um, Another thing that he does, we know we're talking about the expansion of King's Landing, and I wanted to bring up a little map here. I listed on the image, I'm not going to cover all of them, but I listed on the image a couple of the important locations. I removed some as well because not everything that is you know uh, captured here was in King's Landing yet at this particular point in history. We'll cover more of those as King's Landing continues to expand. Um, but the main important things that Aegon builds in King's Landing during his time is the seven gates of King's Landing. So there's the Dragon Gate, there's the Iron Gate, there's the Old Gate, there's the Gate of the Gods, um, there's the River Gate. What else? Lion's Gate, and then the King's Gate. So there's seven huge, very easy to defend gates that he builds, and then hearing about serious pirate raids in Essos and the Summer Isles that huge pirate armies were pulling through and just taking cities, he commissions the building of great walls that connect the seven gates, um, walling a huge portion. I mean, the only cities that are bigger than King's Landing in terms of walled cities at this point are going to be Old Town and White Harbor in the far north. Um, it was a massive undertaking, and uh, you know like a Harrenhal esque undertaking, building of these great walls.
Absolutely.
And
Speaking of Harrenhal, also, Aegon is also laying the foundations to expand the Aegon Fort, a lot of which form in of itself the foundations for what we will know as the Red Keep later on as well.
yes, Yeah, he's laying the groundwork because at this point in history, the Aegon Fort is essentially just a long haul. It's um, one big building where the throne sits, and he didn't spend a lot of his time there during his reign. Actually, he spent most of his time in Dragonstone, and then he was also traveling quite a bit. We'll talk about that in just a second. Um, but another reason for the walls, also just to jump back to that really quickly, is the dragons weren't always there. Visenya and Aegon traveled quite a bit, and the city needed to be defended by something other than just dragon power. So walls. He also, after the death of his beloved sister wife, Rhaenys, commissioned the building of a sept of remembrance, he calls it, um, here on Rhaenys' hill, and that was kind of an altar, almost a just to remember her and celebrate her life. Kind of sweet, you know. It's like
Yeah,
that
and it
that
becomes the
Indian.
people's sept, right? In King's Landing, like, you look
Yeah.
around and this is kind of the more common places of King's Landing. Flea Bottom's right there,
Hmm.
these are kind of where the
And this
peasantry would stay in the
hook market
city.
starting to build right here.
Right,
So
exactly.
these are kind of the
So,
lower end.
it's kind of a testament to the legacy of Rhaenys, her love of the small folk, that becomes her legacy is that hill, Rhaenys's hill.
Yeah. And that'll be a location of some very interesting stuff going forward too. A lot of cool stuff happens there. Um, yeah.
And thousands of people are coming here, right? I
Oh,
mean,
tons.
it's growing quick.
Yeah, and they want to be close to these powerful lords. The Targaryens are getting quickly becoming godlike in the eyes of the small folk. Um, so yeah, another thing that Aegon liked to do during the later part of his reign is the royal progresses. Archmaester Jack, you want to talk a little bit about royal progresses?
Yeah, he visits pretty much as the Seven Kingdoms as he can. He travels with a bunch of other lords and servants and knights. And instead of flying places, he will ride across the land. And he'll also bring, his sons and, you know, their children as well to go see the realm. And it's a way of keeping them in touch with the people, right? And as well as the problems of the various lords and lord paramounts. So he goes to the Iron Islands, Sisterton, he goes to the north,
Yeah, his
you
line
know.
there is, and he was targeted with his, especially the early progresses, and the later ones he gets a little bit more lackadaisical, like he goes down to the Reach and has a good time, like has feasts and stuff. But his early progresses, he really targets them, as you mentioned, to the specific places that were, a little bit more rebellious than the other places. The Iron Islands had to, go through a couple of wars just to get their Lord Paramount, and Sisterton, was a rebel force there for a time, and the North is the North. So, um, yeah, he was very targeted with that. But as I mentioned later, as he goes on, he starts to become a little bit more just interested in culture and experiencing the different lands in his realm. An important thing to note here too is that among the people that he brought, he did bring, as Archmaester Jack mentioned, servants and knights and various courtly people. Uh, he also brought 6 maesters on every single one of his progresses, and the purpose of that was to have these learned men with him that could tell him the different cultural influences and things of the places that he was going, and their different practices and such, and how to make sure not to offend the small folk. So he was very courteous and interested in making sure that people saw him as a good king. Um, he wanted that image, even though he also wanted the fearful image of, like this image we're showing on screen right now of him here on Dragonback in front of the small folk. He did also want this. So it was like this kind of a combination of both things where he wanted them to be terrified of him in the power that he could unleash upon them. But he also wanted them to be like, oh yeah, this guy's all right. He comes to our feasts and he hangs out with us and he laughs at our jokes. Um, and I think it lays the groundwork for, again, as we mentioned, the continuation of the Targaryen rule.
Now, Aegon himself is never knighted, but he has children who are knighted. And in fact, a lot of knights are having tournaments now in this new era of peace. And so we'll also see not just from the royal progresses, but the reasons he didn't have to focus on areas like the Westerlands or the Reach or the Stormlands is that they're constantly hosting feasts and tourneys that he could readily travel to from King's Landing. So
Absolutely.
yeah, like you mentioned before, it's interesting that he did chose like the farthest reaches of the realm to go visit.
Well, he wanted, he knew that that was the most dangerous location, right? Like the one most likely to rebel against you is the person furthest away from you, right? Because you're not scary if you're far away. You're
Exactly.
just like something over there. Whereas, you know, if you pull up on your giant dragon, that's a little more scary. That image stays with you a little bit longer. So
Absolutely.
it's definitely a strategic effort and an effective one. His reign was after the end of the Dornish War, which ended about 10 AC or 12 AC, something like this. I should know that off the top of my head.
12 AC.
12 AC. After 12 AC, there was little to no conflict in Westeros. And he ruled till 37 AC. So that's quite a bit of time. A very peaceful later reign for such a violent man. Um, let's talk about his children a little bit, huh? I think we've left them out long enough. We've been avoiding talking about them.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect time. If you want to start with the eldest of the two.
Yeah, so before Rhaenys' death, about 3 years before Rhaenys' death, a son is born to Aegon and Rhaenys. This is the eldest son of Aegon, and they name him Aenys. That's kind of a cute combination of Rhaenys and Aegon. Um, yeah, that's Aenys. Actually, hold on, I got an image here. Here we go. There's the dragon's family. Um, so here, of course, in the center, we have Aegon the Conqueror. On his right, or I suppose that would be his left, actually, but our right, is Queen Rhaenys. Sitting on his knee here is Aenys, who I'm talking about. Here's Visenya and baby Maegor, who we'll get to in just a second. Um, so yeah, Aenys is born to Aegon and Rhaenys, and it is a moment of great joy. It happens during the Dornish War, so people are quite excited about it because this is a dark period, and then a little blonde princeling comes along to kind of cheer him up a little bit in this dark period. Unfortunately, that period gets much darker very shortly after he's brought into the world in 3 AC or in 10 AC. He's born in 7 AC. In 10 AC, Queen Rhaenys is killed, or at least disappears. So he unfortunately grows up without the influence of his mother. He does, however, get a lot of attention from his dad, King Aegon. And he does also, uh, although it's a kind of a tenuous relationship, get some influence from his how would you describe the relationship between Hades and
His
Visenya?
aunt,
Yeah, his aunt, his mother-in-law. I don't. I don't know. Um,
stepmother, it's weird. Yeah,
stepmother. It
it's
gets weird when you
difficult
start
to
talking about
yeah.
that. Um, but yeah, Aenys was described as quite a jovial boy before the disappearance of his mother, but after the disappearance slash death of his mother, he becomes a little bit more sullen, introverted. Um, he's a very studious man as well. He likes to read books and talk to maesters and learn things about the world. And Aegon encourages this in him. He thinks it's a good characteristic for a king to be learned. Um, Aegon also encourages Aenys uh, to come to courtly events, to go on tour with him to the various places that we talked about. Aegon going on tour, to join him in small council meetings and courtly progressions, like hearing people's grievances and such. He was very, very much the heir and treated as the heir. Um, and Aegon was very fond of his eldest son, even despite some of his deficiencies, his social deficiencies, and he was kind of a weak, small boy, and later a weak, small man. Which to Aegon, who was, this big, strong sword fighter, conqueror figure, was a little bit of a disappointment, but he loved his son regardless.
Yes, it's an interesting contrast as we talk about Maegor, but yeah, Aenys is not a warrior. He's not a knight. He was never knighted. And, martial prowess isn't really necessarily his thing. But as we see with Maegor on the left there, the little baby, that is quite the opposite. Maegor is headstrong, very, very big, even as a child, was very, very tall and very large, and one of the fiercest warriors Westeros has ever seen, even possibly you could argue even beyond his father. Just naturally gifted with a sword. He was knighted at 16, which is one of the youngest ages we have recorded
And they,
of.
they also say that his mother put a sword in his hand as early as 3 years old, Visenya. So, like, his whole life, he was really quite martial.
Absolutely. And it's telling that when Aegon died, Blackfire went to him, not to
Yeah, we'll
Aenys.
we'll talk about that a little bit too in a second. I think that's an interesting little decision that is made there. Um, yeah, so I mean, Maegor is definitely an interesting figure. He's a bit younger than Aenys, as they do picture here. I think he's 5 or 6 years younger. Am I right about that?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. But as Jack said, I mean, just a robust figure. So I don't think he was really worried about being the younger brother to Aenys. I think he shined in his own way. It's only later in their life that they start to have more tension in that way, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode. Um, do you want to talk about the marriages a little bit of these? Because normally, as we know, the Targaryens like to marry siblings. Like Aegon here married his sisters, right? But obviously, these are both male children of the dragon. So what kind of decisions are they faced with that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think another important thing to note is Aenys, I believe, was born with a dragon. A dragon hatched in his crib. Um,
Oh, did we? Yeah, we didn't mention that. We should mention. Did he have a dragon?
he did. Quicksilver,
Oh, it was
I believe,
Quicksilver,
hatched
his
in his
dragon.
crib. Yes.
Oh yeah, we should mention that. My bad, dude.
No, you're all
I'm,
good.
I'm pushing past important details here.
But that's important is that Aenys was born with a dragon and Maegor was
Was
not.
not.
And that's
Yeah.
also an interesting thing that we'll talk
W-
more about next episode.
Yeah, and I would like to say a line that Magor says. I think as a relatively young person too. I think he was only 16 or 17 when he said this. Um, Aenys marries a woman named Alyssa Valari, and we'll talk about the marriages in just. I'm gonna let Jack talk about the marriages in just a sec, but Aenys marries a woman named Alyssa Valarian, and she once questioned Maegor quite publicly in court about his reasoning for not having a dragon. And she claims, like in front of other people, maybe my good brother is afraid of dragons. And Maegor is quite insulted by this, and he says, "No, I'm not afraid of dragons. There is only one that suits me." And of course, that is in reference to Balerion the Black Dread, which is ridden currently by his father, Aegon the Conqueror.
The largest dragon in the realm. And you can notice this already with Maegor, this sort of idea that he is, a dragon lord, that he wants the biggest dragon. He wants to be the best warrior. He has a very martial spirit, very like his mother, very much like his mother in that way.
Absolutely. Um, but yeah, so there are two Targaryen boys and no sisters to be wed. So they have to look outside of the family for the first time in a couple generations. This was probably quite beneficial to them. Um, inbreeding has effects. You want to talk a little bit about that, Jack?
Yeah, so Aenys ends up marrying Alyssa Velaryon. The Velaryons and the Targaryens have been closely aligned for decades, if not centuries, at this point. So there's really no surprise there in that coupling. But Maegor has a much more political marriage in Cerise Hightower. And I think this is an early, perhaps, attempt by the Targaryens to get a little bit more founded in Westerosi culture and ways by, marrying the daughter of, one of the largest cities in the realm.
And
You
not
can
a
think of it that
not a
way.
Valerian, Aenys marries a Valerian at so Valarian is also an ancient Valerian house, not Dragon Lords, but also a Valerian house. So Aenys doesn't really step that far out of the family tree, whereas Maegor marries this person who's a Westerosi through and through.
Yeah, and that creates its own conflict that we'll probably talk about in episode 3. But it's
Absolutely.
an interesting distinction.
Yeah, and that marriage between them remains barren. No children are born, despite Maegor's boasting that there will be children born on the wedding night. No children are born of that marriage, um, but Aenys and Alyssa do produce some children. There's the Princess Rhaena and her younger brother, the Prince Aegon. They end up getting married to each other, as is the Targaryen custom. And then they have a couple of younger siblings as well, Viserys, Jaehaerys, Alysanne, and Vela. And those uh, last couple of figures will be more important as we continue on. But for now, I just wanted to mention their names. These are the children of Aenys, and they were all born, except for, I believe, Vela. They were all born during the life of Aegon the Conqueror.
This is the original royal family, right?
Yeah,
This is the original family tree you can think of in a way. And in a way of a lot of Targaryen dynasties, we're going to see some amazing things and also some very tragic things.
absolutely. And that's coming up shortly. In this very next episode, we're going to be talking about the reigns of Aenys and Maegor and what becomes of these two brothers and the children as well. We're going to be covering all of that next. But in order to wrap up this particular section, there's only one thing really left to cover, Archmaester Jack.
Aegon was 64 years old when he was entertaining his family at Dragonstone and talking to his grandsons about his glorious days in the conquest. He, mid sentence, died of a stroke, and the dragon passed away. And that's the first Targaryen king right there. And what an end. You know what I mean? He died with surrounded by family and,
Yeah,
you
after
know,
years of peace in his newly founded kingdom, with his line secure and an heir and a spare, as well as grandchildren that were born to his heir. He's feeling good about himself. There were tragedies in his life, but he was quite successful. He conquered 6 kingdoms. He brought peace to the realms, and I think he died a relatively happy man. Um,
I think so too.
I think
Or at
it's
least I like to think so.
I'd like to think so as well. He is survived, of course, by his 2 sons, Aenys and Maegor, as well as his elder sister and wife, Visenya. Um, and they come together on Dragonstone about 2 days after his death, and the dragon is laid to rest. Vagar supplies the fire for the pyre, ordered by Visenya, to uh, light the fire. Here we see the next royal family. This is Aenys, Prince Aenys, his 2 eldest sons, Aegon and Viserys, and his wife, Alyssa Velaryon. And they are going to be the next royal family that we will cover in episode 3. Uh, is a great life Aegon lived. Do you have any final thoughts on the Conqueror as we finish up our first section here?
I mean, this is the most foundational reign in all of the Targaryen kings. I mean, he sets the groundwork for the rest of our story that we're going to be talking about here. And I think what an explosive way to start. But we'll see sort of the cracks in every single feudal system as we analyze the next generation of Targaryens, and we'll see that you can leave a lasting and good legacy, and still your family could fall apart just in the next generation. So
Yeah, it doesn't
yeah,
take much, does it? They're
doesn't take much at all.
they're always teetering on the edge. But yeah, thank you very much for taking this ride with us, you guys. We appreciate you guys. We hope you like the video. Subscribe for future content. We've got 13 more episodes coming on this particular branch, and more besides. Um, please subscribe, and you'll get more of that content. Also, feel free to comment with questions or clarifications or corrections, because we're not perfect. Um, we know a lot about this stuff, but sometimes we make mistakes. We appreciate you guys. We hope you have a good night. Say farewell, Archmaester Jack.
See you later, guys.
Take it easy.